Yes. The Prowler from 1981, directed by Joseph Zito. Um, this is a movie that I have known about for a very long time, which is kind of interesting because, I would say I've considered myself a horror fan for God since I was maybe 12, like when I first started really getting into like Friday the 13th movies. And I want to say I probably heard about this movie for the first time, like at that time, because it's got Joseph Zito who directed it. He directed Friday the 13th Part 4. And this movie was also worked on by Tom Savini, uh, one of the myriad of early 80s horror films that he just absolutely went off on. And I'm just going to come out and say it, I've seen The Burning, I've seen Friday the 13th, I've seen Maniac, I've seen even like Dawn of the Dead and stuff like that. Well, I can't really compare this to Dawn of the Dead because it's completely different, it's a zombie movie. But let me just say, of the slashers that I've seen, this I think is Tom Savini's most consistent work yet. In that, you know, you look at a movie like The Burning, the raft scene is insane. It's probably the best, uh, you know, display of practical effects of like the 80s. Let alone just in general, whether that's by Tom Savini's work or not. Um, but there is not a single kill in this movie that is like not exceptional or stellar for like 80s slasher practical effects standards. There's not a single cutaway like off-screen kill. There is not like Tom Savini literally went full bore every chance he got, and I appreciate the hell out of that. You know, obviously this movie, as prolific as it was for me, it's not like some big giant horror movie that was a box office hit or anything like that, which is likely why the copy I watched on Shudder and just probably in general, I don't think it got a theatrical release, so there wasn't this big fear surrounding the MPAA. So I'm sure Tom Savini felt free to just kind of be like, "Fuck it, I'm just gonna put my heart and my soul into this." But it's amazing, man, because this was made in 1981, and he did Maniac, Friday the 13th, and The Burning, and this movie all within like a year and a half span. Like that is crazy. Tom Savini is fucking nuts. All right, and I want to like tip my cap and just be like, man, he is worth recognizing and he is worth praising because, like I said, that is this movie's biggest strength. And now let me just say this: the Prowler does not reinvent the wheel. It is not an A plus, unique, fantastic horror movie to me, by any stretch. Right? It is a slasher movie through and through. With that being said, I love slasher movies. It's probably my favorite horror subgenre, especially early '80s slasher movies. And when the kills are great, like they are in this movie, and I mean, like I said, if I had to pick, the weakest kill might just be either the very beginning, which is still a pretty fucking brutal impaling, or just the shotgun blast to the guy at the very end of the movie, who we think is our savior. I think his name's like Otto, some random big fat dude. Um, that might be the weakest kill, but it's still just a shotgun blast, so it's not like there's like a big impalement where there's a lot of room to make it like crazy and over the top and special and brutal. But I mean, good God, like it's awesome, and it also features a unique killer, which is always cool, right? My boy is kitted the fuck out in some soldier garb. He looks a little goofy, because like he's like, I don't know. It reminds me a little bit of like I Know What You Did Last Summer, in that like he's kind of got like this. He's got like the helmet, but he's got like a zip up, like where you can't see his like eyes or anything. Like it looks like he's wearing like a big turtleneck or something, or he looks like he's wearing that like raincoat. from I Know What You Did Last Summer. Um, but I mean, you know, obviously he's got some knives that he carries around in his little tool belt on some Friday 13th Part 6 Jason Lives shit. But he also has a pitchfork, which is cool. But to top it off, and, you know, at the end of the movie is when, you know, he really puts it to use. But he's got a fucking shotgun, too. Like, it's not often, man, where you see a slasher villain who's gonna kick somebody out of a pool, which is fucked. Um, and also, you know, pitchfork somebody to death and pull out a shotgun all in one fucking movie. You know, be overkill as fuck if he did that to one person. But yeah, he's pretty unique, and I kind of fuck with him. And the more that I think about it, you know, this movie does kind of remind me of My Bloody Valentine, which is kind of interesting because they came out the same year. And you know, they both take place in a town that is mourning like a 30-year anniversary of a previous killing, where there's like a celebration going on. Obviously, in My Bloody Valentine, it's not necessarily a graduation; it's like a Valentine's Day celebration. But with this, it's got kind of a tropey, run-of-the-mill, pedestrian, not all that interesting setup. You know, there's people coming home from war. Somebody gets pissed because their girlfriend breaks up with him, and he ends up killing them. And then 30 years later, there's like college graduates at the same kind of party, and boom, he's back again to exact his revenge. It's kind of boring. Like, it's not boring, but it's just nothing like special, nothing that unique. And one thing I can say, you know, in regards to My Bloody Valentine, we have that setup, but the killer, I think I probably do prefer the look of Harry Warden a little bit more than the look of the killer in good old Prowler. But I do see the similarities not only in the setup but also the, you know, the killer's getup. But I think that all in all, I think the Prowler is a higher quality movie, based on like its parameters and its setting, because like obviously it's got a more unique, My Bloody Valentine is the more unique setting because it's in, like, the mines and shit. But I don't know, I feel like the Prowler does more with the rest of itself outside of like the dope ass like masked killer with the pickaxe. If that makes sense. I don't know. Just the more that I thought about it, the more I was like, man, these movies are kind of fucking similar. You know, they're kind of fucking similar. Yeah, one thing also that I noticed that was kind of interesting, and early on in the movie, you know, a great majority is focused on two characters, right? It's focused on this guy named Mark, who's like a police officer, and then his kind of love interest slash like I guess girlfriend slash like fellow college graduate or soon to be graduate. I'm really bad with names, but you know, there's not an ensemble cast really at all. Those are like the two main characters that are on screen and or are kind of the center of the attention for, I want to say, like 80% of the movie, which is kind of interesting because that's not necessarily something that's usually traditional in slashers, unless it's like at the very end of the movie, you know, like that's established when there's 30 minutes of the 90-minute runtime that's left, right? But that's kind of from the jump. And I mean, there's a point in the movie where, you know, our protagonist, you know, our sole survivor, if you will, not necessarily the sole survivor, but she like is face to face with the killer like 20 minutes into the movie, and I'm like, what? And like there are kills spliced throughout this movie. The pacing is really fucking good. Like I genuinely, like when I realized that, okay, this is the main character, like this is probably going to be the final girl, and she's in like a chase with the killer like 25 minutes into the movie, I'm like, okay, what? There's still an hour left in the movie. What the fuck is going to happen? Right? And there's not a huge body count, but despite there being a heavy emphasis placed on like kind of following around two characters, there's still enough variety. Like there's a decent, not a decent but amount, but there's enough scenes at like the graduation party and a few other characters, but they're always with those two characters in mind, right? Like if there is a scene at the party, it's because one of those two characters is there. If there's a scene at the sheriff's office, or there's a scene somewhere that's not, you know, inside like the sorority dorm house or whatever, where the great majority of the film takes place in the chase and so on and so forth, one of those two characters is there, which I don't know, I felt was kind of unique. Personally, the characters I can kind of take or leave. Not that significant. I do enjoy the final girl because she's a badass, but the characters, none of them really stuck out except for the final girl. And I will say, shout out to her, because while the movie itself wasn't incredibly riveting, I did appreciate the pacing, and that's definitely something that kept me interested. But the last like 10 minutes, first off, I do have a gripe. Why on earth, and I get it, plot armor, blah, 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 it's, you know, a low-budget 80s slasher. It's not perfect, you know, script-wise, but the killer doesn't decide to kill Mark after literally killing basically everybody who's even on screen for a second. He just, like, knocks him out. Like, okay. Because at first I thought he killed him, and I was like, what? That's a lame kill. And then, you know, at the end of the movie, he ends up being alive the whole time, which is kind of weird. I guess it kind of makes sense when the twist kicks in. Spoiler alert. I make these for myself to look back on months and or years later so I can recollect the movies better. But seeing that the killer at the very end turns out to be the sheriff that was in the movie earlier, I guess it kind of makes sense that he doesn't kill Mark, who's a police officer, ACAB. But that kind of threw me off. But the ending chase is pretty dope. Very intense, very suspenseful. I liked it quite a bit. And, you know, there's the false ending where dude comes out of nowhere, blows him away with the rifle or the shotgun. And there's like an awkward moment where they're both just kind of like staring at each other, and like she's like smiling, and it's like a really awkward because it's like, what the fuck? Like, all that just happened, and you're just kind of like sitting there smiling at each other, like it's a really peaceful moment. And then boom, homeboy pulls out the fucking double barrel shotgun and blasts his ass away. Like, what? Like, oh my god, you know, all right. And she stabs him with a pitchfork, and you know, so he's taken this guy who's got to be like 60 years old too, because he's the same dude from the beginning. Took you know, a shotgun shot right to the gut, and was stabbed with a pitchfork, and he's still fucking chugging. We get the cool little reveal, which, you know, I'm all right with. Again, kind of reminded me a bit of the My Bloody Valentine, in that it's like a character that the city or just like the people are aware of, like, oh, it's a legend, blah, blah, blah. But the ending is exquisite. It's not often where there's a fucking shootout in the finale of an 80s slasher film. And she fucking, the cherry on the top of this delicious 80s slasher sundae, curated by the one, the only, the great Tom Savini, with yet again another shotgun blast, head explode. You know, I don't know if he took some pointers and or used, you know, his work in Maniac the year before as like a frame of reference maybe. But yeah, that finale, fucking crazy, right? Head blown the fuck off. The epilogue is kind of weird. Didn't really care for that. But man, you want to talk about a satisfying finish, a fitting climax? Does it get much better? Like, is there a better death of an antagonist in a horror film in an early 80s slash? I don't think so. You know, and so I think that this movie is not, like I said, it's not going to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't do anything outrageously, you know, otherworldly, right? Like, it's not like, you know, I think of a movie like Terror Train, which is just kind of like an 80s slasher, but it takes place on a train, and there's all these like different switch ups with like the different costumes, and like there, you know, several different components that are unique, right? With this, there's not a lot, but there's such great levels of execution upon the kind of the core fundamentals of like the 80s slasher, and I think that is ultimately why it stands tall and why it's a movie that, you know, I have known about and have been aware of and have been kind of low-key wanting to watch for like 10 fucking years, despite it being a movie that, unless you're a horror fan, you probably never even fucking heard of, right? And so for that reason, I think it deservedly does stand tall among the, you know, myriad of early 80s slasher films. Shout out Joseph Zito. Again, he directed Friday the 13th Part 4, one of the best Friday the 13th movies in the whole series. Tom Savini, he worked on this movie, so that gives it a little bit of credibility. He's not going to work on a piece of shit movie, you know, at that point in his career at least. And it's, like I said, it's his most consistent and best body of work. There is not a kill that is skipped on at all. There is no fucking off-screen kills. There is nothing cut away early. There is blood. There's guts. Everything balls to the wall. With that being said, I don't really consider it like a horror classic. But I will say that it checks practically every box in terms of like quality slasher from the early 80s. I'm gonna give it 4 out of 5. 4 out of 5. If there is, you know, a need to watch an 80s slasher, there's no reason that this movie will not satisfy your appetite. It's good.